the work assigned to the 18th Group and the 6th, 7th Squadron that I was in Korea was what we call interdiction. And that was, again, direct frontline support as well as interdiction of the supplies and supply routes that the North Koreans were providing to support their troops. So it's a different regime and a different type of flying. It was all low altitude, in and among the trees, and finding the targets and working to support the protection of our troops on the ground.
That was my next point. Lots of low altitude flying, in
Oh,
among the trees.
in
And
among
I've
the
been
trees.
to Korea, so I mean, lots of treacherous
Mountains,
and cliffs.
indeed.
Harrowing experiences. Tell me about something. Any close calls there?
One very close. They're firing on gun emplacements on a hillside that was trying to protect a valley. We had been assigned and picked up our targets, and we're firing our guns and at a gun emplacement, but you see just as many tracers and so on coming back and flying by the aircraft because they're firing away at us. They'd turn those guns away from Army targets and on us as we were coming in, and took a hit out in the wing, and it's fortunately it was in the wing, because if it had been in the cockpit, I'm not sure I'd be here to talk about it, and begin to lose fuel and so on out of that wing, but was able to get the aircraft back to my home base, and it did require a wing replacement, but that's the nature of war. So it took a pretty good millimeter hit in the wing that caused that damage, but that, they repair that aircraft, you get in another and keep on flying.
Now, when that happens to you, do you go into autopilot, so to speak? I mean, or is there a very human side of you that recognizes what has just happened, and there's a part of you that's scared, but then says, wait a minute, I have a mission to do?
Yeah, your adrenaline level gets pretty high because you don't know whether you're going to be able to continue to fly the aircraft, whether you're going to have to crash land, whether you'd be in enemy territory or get back into safe territory or get back to your home base. As I say, I was fortunately able to get the aircraft back for a landing at my home base. So a combination of your training pays off, adrenaline, but a lot of things go through your mind pretty quickly of what might happen or you don't know. But it's part of what we're prepared for, and when you look at the gear we have and the survival equipment you carry, you just hope you're not, in a certain sense, you're going to have to try to begin to use it, which some certainly did. But in my case, I was able to get back and continue the mission operation.
Now, your tour of duty ended on a pretty high note. Well, you had some missions left to do, but you got a spot promotion to major.
I was very fortunate in my integrated assignments. Again, it's one of the good things that I think came out of the opportunity, that there was that growing respect for the ability. I'd gone to maintenance officer school, so I started out, even though I was flying the combat missions, was the squadron maintenance. Well, everybody had additional duties. I was the maintenance officer for the squadron. We lost our commander on a mission, Lou Sabile. In fact, he was the first Congressional Medal of Honor winner, Air Force Congressional Honor winner in Korea. Lost his life on a mission, and the operations officer, and the assignments were by senior. I was a senior captain at the time. The operations officer moved to commander. I moved from maintenance to operations. Another young man took my place in maintenance. I did get the spot promotion while there and completed 100 missions, and that was the opportunity either to return home, and I asked if I couldn't go back to the Philippines because I had just gotten over there and wanted to complete that overseas tour, and once the war settled down, they allowed families to come, so that opportunity was there in early of '51, and So that's what I did, going back with that promotion. It was a spot promotion. There it was confirmed, and went back to the Philippines, and that became a thrill because they had the F-80 jet aircraft, and I'd never flown a jet, and that became the opportunity. Again, they didn't ask what you wanted to do because one of the fighter squadrons of the group had been left in the Philippines, if you will, for air defense work that they had been doing. And as a combat returnee, I was assigned to that squadron that first month as the operations officer, again based on seniority, but the commander's tour was over a little over a month later, and I moved up and became the commander of the 44th Fighter Bomber Squadron, which was a real thrill to be in command of a fighter squadron, to get into an aircraft that was a real joy to fly because there was no torque with the engines, jet engine operation. You had no torque that the propellers give you, and to go to 100%, check everything in the green, and just go fly was indeed a thrill.
I
So
was just gonna say, Miss Francis sounds like she had some competition between the jets and you know.
she did. She was able to come over and bring our two children that we had at that time with her, and during those, just before we came home, our third child was born there in the Philippines. So we had a grand time. I think it took her a while to get used to fighter pilots. We were a little rough and rugged, I guess, if you will. Probably our club decorum wasn't always what it should be, but we had a great time, and I'd say she had to get used to it because I think when she was coming over, I had stocked the ice box with some food and things we thought we would need, but the squadron was going to have a welcome party, and what she found out when she opened the icebox wasn't the food I'd put in there. It was all of the drinks that had been brought to be chilled for the party. But that was one of the fun things that took place during that time. But we had a grand time for 2.5 years there.
It was quite an experience, very different from what you experienced in the United States in terms of the way you lived as well. I mean, the Philippines were different. You had a maid, you had a yard boy. You know,
that's right.
Frances didn't want to give up the kitchen now.
No, she wouldn't let anybody in her kitchen. She didn't need a cook. She enjoyed cooking and insisted that that was her domain, and so that's the way it was. But it was quite an experience to be accepted as the commander of a squadron, to still enjoy the thrill of flying and realize that we had a mission there to accomplish, and again, that was perhaps a little payback for that respect that we had been seeking and looking forward to.
But like all good assignments, they eventually come to an end, and you had to return back to the States.
Yes, indeed.
What was that transition like? I mean, after being there, being treated a certain way, and being accepted, to have to go, you feel like you were almost taking 2 steps backwards.
But you do have that feeling, and my return, I had at that time had applied to, with the change of command, I still wanted to complete my degree and had applied for bootstrap, but that was denied. One of those things, you know, the losing command saying we don't have jurisdiction, gaining command saying I need you. But a good aspect out of that change coming was that I had been selected to attend command and staff school, which was additional training that would help prepare for future command work or staff work if I remained in the service. And I guess the bad side was that the staff school was in Montgomery, Alabama, and at Maxwell Field. And Maxwell Field still, although the Air Force had declared integration, it was a very slow operation in many areas, in particular the South, and Maxwell had not changed that that much. In fact, one of my early experiences there was sitting down in the barber chair in the barber shop, and suddenly the white barber realized that I was Negro, and he didn't cut Negro hair. And asked me what my nationality was, and I told him, and he didn't cut my hair. He had started, but he didn't finish, and we had to work with the base commander to get at least a barber shop on the base that would cut Negro hair, and that was done, but the living circumstances, living in the community, weren't the greatest either, because there I had to, and this is something I'd never know what I said, but I do know that I had to explain to Charlene, who was in still little past the toddling stage, but explained to her we had found a home, a rental home, a block from a park, but the park was still only white only, and explained to her why she couldn't go play in that park. To this day, I don't remember what I said, but we survived it. And she's done pretty well too along the way.
Short-term sacrifice for long-term gain. Did you ever question when you had to explain that to Charlene? What am I doing here? Is it worth it?
Never got to that point. Again, that bit of hope and faith that slowly things will get better, and that time has to come, still kept me pointed forward. I didn't turn around, and I never was one to look back too much, so things you had to still face what was ahead and keep on going.
So let's jump ahead to 1967, Vietnam, where...
Oh, I'd had some good staff assignments, and a good experience overseas as well in the mid-60s. And as the things progressed, we find ourselves involved in Vietnam. But after a tour at 10th Air Force Headquarters, which is part of the air defense structure, and my assignment time was due because we were still on 2.5 to 3 years you would expect to rotate somewhere, and a couple of options came up, and your name comes up and gets dropped off, but they had need for training of 2 additional reconnaissance squadrons, and these were complete new squadron developed, so apparently they were looking at a couple of senior officers to eventually be commander, and some mid-grade, and so lieutenant colonel, majors, and captains to form the crews for these squadrons, and my name was selected to go to reconnaissance training. So, and they were here approaching December of that year, and again, a separation, because that meant going off to school with our children in school there at the time in Kansas City, Missouri. We found we had to separate. I went to reconnaissance school in January of that year, and we did our ground training classroom work at Shaw Field in South Carolina, and then went out to Mountain M Home Air Base in Idaho to check out in the RF-4C McDonnell Douglas Phantom reconnaissance version of the F-4, where we did crew training, learning how to handle the types of missions that we would have, both low and high altitude, and the ended up forming 2 squadrons, and I became the commander of the 16th Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron and took that squadron to Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Vietnam.
Now, when you were training up for this was a bit of a different experience in terms of the type of aircraft that you were in, because it was now a two-man
That's correct. We called
operation.
him, yeah, right, our systems operator, who was also a pilot.
Very different scenario for you, because up until this point, all of your previous combat experience had been solo.
Solo single engine fighter pilot, right. But again, in a way it wasn't different because it was still a fighter aircraft, and the pilot in command, if you will, was still responsible for doing the aircraft flying. Now, I did teach my backseater, who happened to be a rated navigator but not a pilot, to be able to land the aircraft from the back seat, because they also had controls in the back. But his responsibility was for operating the various systems that we carried to perform the different types of reconnaissance, but it was the pilot's responsibility to maneuver the aircraft to be able to get the pictures that you wanted, or the type to put the aircraft in position to perform the mission that was assigned. So it was still a responsibility that could only be shared in only partially.
Still some hairy work though, reconnaissance.
Very much so, because although in that work we had no weapons to fire back at anybody, we used speed pretty much when possible as our protection, and that aircraft could move pretty fast, and we often did, and have seen tracers trailing off behind many times, particularly on night where you could see them were being fired at, and fortunately we were outrunning it ahead of the aim and came through safely there. But I did have on a day mission again take a big millimeter hit out in the wing. We were preparing to do some daylight reconnaissance in the area, and intelligence hadn't, I guess they knew something was there, but they weren't sure what it was because they hadn't told us to expect the type of fire that was thrown back at us as we were attempting to. And in this case, I ended up having to divert to a friendly base because I wasn't capable of getting the aircraft back to Tan Son Nhut, which is south. We were fairly well north in Laos when we took the hit, but
wow.
Got to a base in North Vietnam.
What were your experiences with other crew? Like, for example, did you have experience with Chappie James at all?
I only not direct flight experience with Chappie. When I was in Korea with the 6th, 7th Squadron, he was flying there with the 12th Squadron, and he had been in the Philippines. Here was his career tour was about over, and when he finished flying in Korea, he went on back came back to the States. As saying, when I finished, I having just gotten over there, went on to my tour there. During the time in Vietnam, again, he did serve over there, but out of Thailand in the F-4 doing a different type of work. I'm in the RF-4 doing the tactical reconnaissance work. So although we kept in touch with each other and I knew him quite well, we were never assigned directly in the same unit or at the same base.
Great respect for Chappie as well?
Oh yes, he was quite a all-around person. So in some ways an envy, because not only was he quite a pilot, but he was a great public speaker, and a person that played football when they had a football team, and played 2 or 3 instruments in the band, so he was an all-around guy. So the times that we had been together and known each other, a lot of respect for him, certainly.
At the end of Vietnam, and you look back on the experience, did you ever think that you would have seen all of the combat flight time that you'd seen at that point? Did you ever get introspective and kind of look back at that point, at the end of Vietnam when you came back?
No, I didn't. Again, it was accumulation, the progress, the type of assignments that I had, the work were all just building blocks, I guess you will, in a career that came about. Wonderful experiences with the people that I worked with and so on, and I never thought. There was a time in the late 50s I had kind of thought about getting out of the service, maybe wanting to be in airlines, and I can only say, looking back, well, I was ready for the airlines, but they weren't ready, because it wasn't until in the mid-60s before, after a couple of lawsuits, that they began to hire. And as I say, I couldn't have written a better script on the type of assignments and the relationships that I had with people. So I just enjoyed the career. And when I left Vietnam, I debated what assignments were available, and they didn't really let you say where you wanted to go, but there were some options kind of thrown out there, and I opted to go from Vietnam to Europe. And of course my wife and family could join me, and enjoyed a year's tour with User and 7th Army, Heidelberg, Germany, lovely spot, and people to work with. While there, I did receive a promotion to full colonel, which was like being promoted out of the job, but I, having just been over in Europe a year, became the chief of maintenance of the 50th Attack Fighter Wing, which had F-4s, and with my F-4 experience, although it was the same aircraft and engine, although it was a different mission, I was still flying. So I actively flew 27 of my 30 years, and that was kind of, they had a program called 45-22. At 45 years of age or 22 years of service, you had to maintain your flying proficiency, but they would say, no, you're relegated to a desk job along the way. You just had to maintain your qualification, but you didn't have to fly regularly. The computer had never kicked out my name, so I was just enjoying the things I was doing. So to actively participate in flying that long in my career was just really a thrill.
After 30 years active duty service, what do you think your legacy was? Because you certainly left one, but what do you think?
Well, it's interesting, because as we look at what it meant for first the Air Force to determine that they would end segregation and use people based on their skill and where there was a need, looking back you could see that transition, but it in some ways it came rather slowly. And for instance, other than outside of, once they closed Lockburn Air Base, of course, where Colonel Davis, later General Davis, was the commander, until Chappie James became the commander of a fighter squadron in Otis, no command was given to a black, even B.O. Davis, after Lockburn closed, in the States for many, many years. And yet I had 2 command assignments overseas. Come back home, it was always staff work. Even leaving Europe, I came back to Air Force Communications Service that happened to be at Richards Gabar Air Base in Kansas City, Missouri, and through an opportunity because the base and wing commander became sick, General Stoney asked if I would like command of the base and wing, and that's a job I'd always had down as one because I'd like to work with people, and became the wing and base commander. And looking at it chronologically, that was the first assignment of a black to a wing base level. At least I've been told that. I hadn't gone to study it because it was I think a month or two later that who he became General Brown got a similar assignment down at Williams Air Base. But here we are in the 70s, early 70s, before, if you will, that level of assignment become to be open even to a minority person. So looking back on the career, can see that progress and the change. So it gives you a good feeling that what you aspired and held out there as a target was still slowly becoming a possibility, that you were treated based on your ability and so on and not color.
So in the subsequent years following retirement, you've been pretty busy.
Well, my wife wasn't too happy, but I found after a month of retirement that I was beginning to look at rearranging the furniture in the living room. And that didn't set too well with her, so I better get out of the house. But I was given an opportunity that turned out to be a fruitful one to go to work for ISC Industries in the business world there in Kansas City, and I did that. And say she was a little chagrined, but I think it was for the best since. But I did go on to enjoy some fruitful experiences working in business, in the business world.
Miss Francis was quite the partner during this whole thing. I always thought, being a military brat myself, that we should get some retirement pay too after going through it with you troops.
Yes. Well, you're right. Sometimes looking back, we don't realize as much and say thank you for the things they do, because there were many times, I'm sure, that she would rather have been doing something else but never voiced it, and was very supportive as we went about our careers and did the things that the military called for. Fortunately, as I say, looking back, we had some wonderful experiences that help you ride through those rougher times and the separations, but I was certainly blessed to have her as a partner indeed.